is Iva, and I work at the Rural Alaska Community Action Program, or Rural CAP, in collaboration with the UAF Tribes Extension, which are the two organizations bringing us together today. So just to welcome everyone into this virtual space together, I wanted to start off with acknowledging where we all are. I think we're probably all on different lands. We here at Rural CAP are on Dena'ina lands. So wherever all of us are, we're on the unceded territories of Indigenous people, and we acknowledge and honor the place-based knowledge and the land stewardship practices of Indigenous peoples and how that benefits all of us. So alongside traditional foodways and land stewardship practices, many communities in Alaska are also engaging with gardening and farming as ways of taking care of the land and feeding people. So it's the mission of this whole webinar series and also the UAF Tribes Extension to provide resources and support for tribes and for all Alaskans as they work toward reaching their goals around food security and food sovereignty. So through this webinar series, we're hoping to have some conversations about topics that will help with that. So please feel free to think of this as a conversation more so than a lecture. And if you have any questions or something to add, like your own knowledge or experience, please feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat, or just unmute yourself, because we have a pretty small group today. And we will be recording this and publishing it on our Rural CAP YouTube channel. So thank you for being willing to be part of that recording so that other people can access this later. So I think we can get started with having our panelists introduce themselves, please. Tikhon, would you like to start off and introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tikhon Galbraith. I am the Associate Director for the Technical Assistant Network with the Intertribal Agriculture Council. I also serve as Vice Chair on the Board of Directors for the Alaska Food Policy Council, and recently supported all this work by serving on the Governor's appointed Food Security and Independence Task Force. Yeah, pleasure to be here with all of you, and looking forward to unpacking some of the federal opportunities. Pass it over to Lori.
Hi everyone, my name is Lori Stewart. I'm the Executive Director for the Tyonek Tribal Conservation District. I've been with this district for about 2 years now. Yeah, we were talking a little bit about some of my background before that, but TTCD has been working on subsistence and agricultural projects since 2011. And so I hope that we might have some examples of things we've done to share with all of you. But to be honest, like what Iva said, I'm as excited to hear about some of your wisdom and experiences as well.
And my name is Amy Pettit. I am the State Executive Director for the Farm Service Agency at USDA. Prior to that, I was with Farmland Trust for 8 years, and then the State Division of Agriculture for 10 years prior to that. So about 19 years now of Alaskan agriculture work, advocacy, and mostly just being a champion and a cheerleader for the industry. I do want to frame today by saying that I am on day 6 of COVID. And so I am a little under the weather, and if I go off screen and mute myself to blow my nose and have a moment, I apologize for that. I was in a meeting earlier this morning, and words just were not coming to me the way that they should. So if I hesitate or if I need to get back to you with information, I apologize for that. This is my first time experiencing COVID, strangely, I guess, and it did hit me kind of hard. So I apologize for that. But looking forward to sharing information today and answering as many questions as I can.
Thank you all for being here, and especially Amy, thank you for powering through COVID. Didn't have to do that, but we appreciate it. My first question for all of you is, what are some of the most utilized programs in Alaska as far as funding for food security and food sovereignty projects?
So I'll start from our perspective here at Farm Service Agency. And I do want to say that I've been in this position now for just about a year. Later this month, it will have been a year since my appointment. And we are a loan servicing agency. We are one of the pieces of the federal government that offers farm loans, agriculture loans, and lending. And we are also here for disaster assistance. Those are our two primary pieces of the pie. However, our administration and our Secretary Tom Vilsack, really wants every person in a position like mine to approach our programs from a one USDA perspective, meaning that if someone comes to me and has a question about SNAP benefits or the NRCS High Tunnel program or Ag Marketing Service, as Tikhon mentioned earlier, my role is to help you find the right program that fits your project, even if it isn't within Farm Service Agency. So I just want to point that out. And then our most utilized program within Farm Service Agency is not a loan or a disaster program. I just said that that's mostly what we do, but our number one program in Alaska is the Rural Cost Transportation Program, or Rural Transportation Cost Program, RTCP. And any person in Alaska who is in an agriculture business, and that is a caveat, many folks are producing food for their own home use and not for commercial sale. And that is going to eliminate you from a number of our programs, including our most popular program, which is RTCP. But if you are selling any of your product through the Farm Bill in the early 2000s, the RTCP program was developed to help level the playing field for transportation costs in Alaska, Hawaii, the Virgin Islands, et cetera. So there's $2 million in that program, and it's specifically designed to reimburse you for any of your transportation costs for moving your product around the state of Alaska, for importing your inputs such as fertilizer, seeds, anything that you have to import from outside, for your fuel costs for moving your product around the state, hauling to market, hauling to the grocery store where you sell your product, anything like that can be a reimbursable cost. And that is our most utilized program at Farm Service Agency, is that RTCP program. The sign-up period is usually towards the end of the summer around harvest time, and then all your receipts are due typically in November, and payments are just about to go out right now for costs that people incurred in 2022. But I want to make sure everybody knows about that program in particular, RTCP. And I see the question, does that include the Postal Service? It absolutely does. Any shipping costs, transportation costs, mileage costs, anything like that that can be tied to transportation of inputs for your product or your product itself can be considered. There is an $8,000 cap on that program, and you will not be reimbursed 100% of your costs. It's typically somewhere between 25 and 28% of your costs. And so we get a lot of criticism on those two pieces. It's not worth the paperwork to only get back 25 to 28%. It's not worth the paperwork to only be reimbursed that $8,000. I hear that, and I agree with you that those two limitations are frustrating. That's where you could turn to your Farm Bill advocacy, because this is legislation that is in place due to the Farm Bill, and it cannot be changed by me, and it cannot be changed by Secretary Tom Vilsack, and it cannot be changed by the president. It can only be changed by Congress through the Farm Bill. So if those two things frustrate you, if you think that cap should be higher, and if you think you should be reimbursed for a higher percentage of your costs, those are feedback items that you could provide through your Farm Bill outreach. Did Danny start that program? I think Danny was in leadership here at Farm Service Agency when that program was created. Yeah, the RTCP program. It has been around. I do think it was the Obama administration and under Secretary Vilsack when he served under the Obama administration that created it. But the current administration doubled the amount of money in the program. Like I said, it used to be $1 million in that pocket of funding. Now it's $2 million. And so that could modify that 28% this year. Anyway, I don't want to get again into the weeds too much, but that's Farm Bill feedback that you could provide on those two pieces of that program. That is our most utilized program within Farm Service Agency. And I don't know if
is that nationwide or just in Alaska?
It covers Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. I think there's 8 of us that get to split that pot.
Oh, that's great.
And I'm happy, Iva, to answer more questions specifically about that, or we can move on to the other panelists, however you want to handle it.
Yeah, if no one has any burning questions right now, maybe let's move on to other panelists, and then we can do more questions at the end. Also, if you have questions you think of like after this whole deal is over, you can email and we can get back to you. So yeah, if no one has a question right now, maybe one of the other panelists could speak to that question.
I'll jump in. Your question was the most utilized, and just by the dollars out the door, I would say SNAP, right? Through that's the biggest utilized thing. The food assistance program is also reflective of the size of the budget allocation within the Farm Bill. And so just to speak to the Farm Bill briefly, the Farm Bill is this large omnibus legislation, if you aren't familiar. It's what determines the allocation of funding to each of the programs of the 17 different agencies underneath the USDA. So the majority of that budget goes to SNAP to provide that nutritional support to families in need, or WIC, or FDIPR. These are all food distribution programs that are utilized in Alaska and across the nation heavily. But in terms of like new enterprise support or operational support or programs being applied for and implemented in Alaska, I would say that NRCS and rural development are the strongest agencies that I am seeing leveraged. And I'm just going to kind of go rapid fire through a few of those. And more recently, with the 2018 Farm Bill, AMS was authorized with a whole bunch of funds that really are supporting this local first focus on food system development. So there's a lot of opportunities through AMS that also are really applicable to Alaska and the work that we're seeing done both in urban and rural settings. So first, I'll just bring attention to the local food promotion program. And that is through the Agriculture Marketing Service. And this is kind of more of if you're trying to stand up a new facility for entrepreneurs, say a commercial kitchen or storage for processing. We're kind of thinking about the system-wide, food system-wide approach for your community. There's a lot of opportunity to leverage the LFP. The Agriculture Marketing Services is AMS. And so I just dropped a link to that one. And all these will have, eligibility requirements and specific scopes, but I do see, I'm just going to rapid fire through all of them, and we can deep dive into any of them if you have specific, but right now I'm just going to keep it kind of high level and just give you each and all the links so that you have them at your will to do the deeper dive. And so another one through AMS is the Local Food Purchase Assistant Cooperative Agreement. The state is eligible for this, but so are the tribal governments. And so this is really a strong opportunity for tribal governments to purchase local food, and then distribute it to socially disadvantaged community members. And so I see this as like the opportunity to say buy from our able-bodied harvesters, say for berries, and redistribute to our elders or those who are mobilely challenged, or buy salmon from the line fishermen and redistribute within the communities that might not be seeing the returns that they would expect. You can also buy value-added items with this. So, and local by the USDA is defined by anything within state. So that's an advantage in Alaska, that definition by the USDA, because it allows us to really think about Alaska's food system as a whole. And, you know, sometimes we get siloed into our regions or into our communities, but, you know, by thinking about it at that statewide level, we can really capitalize on the existing infrastructure and the work that's happening in the individual communities and source from each other. The food distribution program on Indian reservations, currently ANTHC is the only distribution site. But what's exciting about the FDPIR program is that they have 638 contract authority within that was authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill, which has allowed ANTHC, they applied and they're one of the pilot programs, and they are replacing catfish with halibut. So the intention is buy from a local producer with culturally relevant foods and replace a similarly nutritious item with a local available item. And so that has been hugely successful. And I think that we will see additional authorization of more funds to move beyond the pilot program. So Alaska should really be considering standing up more of these distribution sites. It could be a multi-tribe opportunity, such as I think it's 21 communities that ANTHC is serving, or it could be an individual tribe applying as well to be the distribution site for their community. And this stands alongside SNAP. And so you're not eligible for both. You can't get FDPIR and SNAP, but it is a family eligibility by family eligibility. So if you're not eligible for SNAP, you may be eligible for FDPIR. So it's a good supplemental program to have stood up. There's also two really exciting opportunities through the Office of Urban Agriculture. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm trying to find where I had the link. I'll get it to you in just a second. And so the exciting thing about this is there's lots of flexibility in the program, and USDA doesn't have a working definition of urban. So often we think urban and we disqualify ourselves because so many of our communities are, in our minds, are rural, not urban, but there isn't a working definition by the USDA of urban. So any of our community initiatives that are focused on food innovation, this urban ag could really be applicable. And it's looking at those innovative solutions to food production. So it's definitely one worth looking into that is currently open as well. Through the NRCS, there are many different conservation opportunities. We see EQIP leverage quite a bit for the high tunnel opportunities. And so we've seen lots of high tunnels stood up. That has benefits, but we've also seen challenges with that because it requires a kit, a pre-established kit, and many of those aren't prepared to weather our snow or our winds. And so we see those high tunnels collapse quickly. But also through NRCS, there's the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, not currently open. But under that, there is alternative funding arrangements available through NRCS, which allows tribes or a sponsoring organization to engage with NRCS in a direct way that but the limitation of that is that has to have regional impact, regional and conservation improvements. So there'll be a lead partner there, but then you'll have to have demonstrated multiple producers or production sites identified to stand to benefit from the work that's happening with that RCCPP. Through rural development, there's just a lot of kind of incubator funding out there and infrastructure funding available. So you see like the Ag Innovation Center program, and you see meat and poultry processing expansion, and I'm just dropping these links in here. See value-added producer grants, and all these are more, are directly applicable to the work that we see a lot happening. Rural business development grants, and so like the rural business development grant is more of that incubator. It's a nonprofit or the municipality or the tribe creating an opportunity for like rural business incubation support, and maybe there's multiple entrepreneurs in a community that are looking to start their own businesses, or you're trying to do economic development within a community or a region. That is the intention of that one. The Value Added Producer Grant is if you are a harvester. I think it's a great opportunity for our our harvesters who have businesses where they are operating at the cottage food level, right? But maybe they want to expand and grow that operation. Maybe they want to increase their sales. The Value Added Producer Grant is great because there's funding for like feasibility studies. There's 2 different stages of grants, one for implementation and one for like the research and evaluation. And so if someone's looking for funds to dial in their operation more, get a feasibility study completed, engaged to have a formal business plan developed, those funds would be an opportunity there. Just again, rapid fire, so bear with me here. There's also the Rural Innovation Stronger Economy, the RISE grant through rural development. And this one is, again, at the food system level, and it's about economic development. But, I think all of us here identify food as this foundational opportunity, right? And it can really serve to be that economic stimulus for our rural communities and create the jobs. And so framing a proposal around like the establishment of a new farm enterprise, or growing, a quantity of a commodity that would, potentially employ multiple people or create job training opportunities, are all things that would really hydroponic growing operations, like all these things could potentially fit within this RISE opportunity. I'll pause there. I think that's a lot. I think maybe I have 1 or 2 others, but I'll just throw the links in there, and I'll let Lori talk about, I think, she's had some experience implementing a lot of this work and exposure to NRCS. So I'll let Lori speak.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Lori, if you could also speak to the question of like how to, when you're looking at all of these opportunities, like how to figure out which one would be the most applicable for what you want to do,
Right.
and then navigating all the requirements.
Right. Yeah, such a great question. I see Emily asking, right, how to navigate the complex requirements of federal grant applications. And a couple of thoughts that occurred to me, right, is one of the very first things that I do. And so just to preface the context here too, we're a 501c3, so we're a nonprofit. So I have those budget and fiduciary considerations. So one of the first things I look at is what is the non-federal match requirement. Out of hand, we might be turning down opportunities that require a 1-to-1 match, especially if I can't figure out where that would come from. And we are lucky in that we do have some support from our ANC. So we have some amount of non-federal match to apply to things, but that runs out pretty quickly. Looking at who owns the land or what the operational relationship to the farm is too might be a consideration for looking at NRCS, EQIP, or CSP contracts as well. You have to have a relationship to the landowner for them to apply for that. Really looking at what deliverables are asked in the grant. And to be honest, there are also really pragmatic considerations. There are some of these applications that might say that they will only are planning to award 10 awards nationally. And so you have to really look at what your competitive level or competitiveness is as well. And I would say that the more you can partner with others, and I know you were going to ask this question about what are some of the underutilized opportunities in Alaska, and one of the thoughts that had occurred to me was we really need more partnerships. I think in this work that there's quite a bit of very site-based work and very community-specific approaches that are happening. But I think that we will be more competitive as a group and as a network when we start to say, what pilot projects can we also have on our site? Like what soil improvement programs could we be doing so that what I do informs other groups, or we could be trying different pilot projects, for example, and then we write a grant together that looks at it as a holistic picture of soil enhancement or soil improvement projects across the state. There is one such project right now that Calypso Farms has gotten a grant for through NRCS, taking that approach. But that not only makes us more competitive for the grants, it means it's a good way to partner with organizations who have federal grant writing and management experience to allow them to be the primary PI and to really build your resume and your skill set through that partnership as well. And then I see Ronalda offering the Alaska Village Initiatives also offers free technical assistance to navigate grant applications. And there are also a few other entities like TTCD, Connect Tribe, and I believe the ATRIC, the Atna Tribal Conservation District as well, also have some technical assistance support for folks who might reach out and ask questions. There are lots of people willing to help if you just reach out with some specific questions.
Yeah, also the Tribes Extension and Intertribal Agriculture Council. So really just take your pick. Yeah.
And always I would say your agency representation, so Amy Pettit and her shop, all the staff at FSA, NRCS, they're all there to serve you and work with you directly and answer any questions. The key there is asking the questions early on, not the day before the grants are due, though. That's the key.
There are two other entities that I want to make you aware of, particularly Catholic Social Services out of Anchorage actually received some federal funding to help underserved communities better understand USDA programs. So that's a specific funded program that they just were awarded this year. Keenan Plate, if you know Keenan, reach out to him if you have. And then Fairbanks Farmers First. I think the gentleman's name is Clay. I met him recently, but he's a lawyer who's trying to help provide access and understanding. He's actually providing kind of this same service without any funding. He knows that the system is difficult to navigate. So anyway, that's another one that I've heard of. When Tikon was talking, and Lori as well, another hotly and greatly utilized program within the USDA funding pot is the specialty crop block grant money that's funded through the State Division of Agriculture. So it's federal funds, but they award it to the state, and then the state disperses those funds. A little bit of difficulty, I think, at the State Division of Agriculture this past year with staff turnover and changes and lots of programs, but that program in particular, SCBG, has funded hundreds of projects since 2006, variety trials, nursery greenhouse construction, I mean, all sorts of things. And a lot of those reports are available on their website. That was one of the requirements in the early days of the program when I was running it. You had to create a report at the end of your project to say whether it worked or didn't work and what you would have done differently next time, and make that available to the public. And I was told just last week that you can still find those reports on the State Division of Agriculture website. So, always a good idea to see if somebody's gone before you and tried something and, build upon their project. So that, again, that's the specialty crop block grant. And I see it is probably closed for this year, but it's annual funding, the up to 3-year projects, or projects in length of 3 years. I mentioned that Catholic Social Services had just received funding to help provide technical assistance to underserved producers. That funding comes through the 2501 program. If you Google USDA 2501, that is not handled under any of the previously mentioned agencies within USDA. It's handled by a special outreach agency. So I'm familiarizing myself with that program because I think it has a lot of unique opportunities in Alaska. I believe with that funding, you can actually purchase land. Probably not as an individual producer, but if you are a nonprofit, if you're a tribal organization, if you're another group of individuals working together with the 2501 funding, I think there is some opportunity for land purchase. And another one that rings some bells, and I specifically want to mention it to this group, that Rural Business Development Grant offered by our colleagues at Rural Development. When I was at Farmland Trust, I applied for that funding, and not only will it pay for a little bit of staff time, but we hired attorneys and tax specialists, and we had some transition planning. So Farmland Trust offered workshops for farmers, producers, people that were thinking about getting into business to come in and get some business planning guidance, some legal guidance, and some tax guidance before you got too far down the road. So if there's a group of people, a nonprofit, et cetera, that wants to offer that kind of service to their potential producers, that RBDG money, Rural Business Development Grant money, can be used in that way. And I would say almost any of these programs at USDA are underutilized in the state of Alaska. There is way more money to be given out. I don't know of a program that turns away people for lack of funding. It's typically not enough applicants. That value added producer grant, I would love to see more of those awarded in the state of Alaska. Like Tikhon said, it's taking your product from berries to jam, and maybe you need a facility, maybe you need a commercial kitchen, maybe you need, anyway, that program has a ton of money in it. And I think they've only awarded like 2 grants ever in the history of the program in Alaska, one with the peony growers and one with, I can't remember the other one, but anyway, another hotly underutilized program that is available.
I wanted to expand on Amy's point of like some of these are closed, but almost all of these are annual. And so there's a cycle to the federal grants that's worth paying attention to. A lot will kind of be opened up and made available, January, February, and then kind of into March, and then closed by the time that summer hits is the typical kind of big block grant schedule for the USDA. There are some exceptions to that, obviously. So any of the programs that I shared that are currently closed, it's worth continuing to monitor, like the value added producer grant that will likely be opened up very soon, or the meat and poultry processing expansion that will likely be opened up very soon. So continuing to monitoring these. And when you identify a good fit, usually year to year, there is some changes, some updates to reporting requirements, or the grant administration side, or the application eligibility based on feedback and how it went in the previous year. But for the most part, they kind of stay the same. And so like anticipating the requirements based on last year's application is a great way to begin strategizing and determining your own eligibility and whether or not the program is going to fit. With federal funding, as has been identified, there's a lot of paperwork usually, and a lot of sharing of information have a successful application, and a lot of requirements that go along with it. So, I always encourage to not try to make your program fit USDA, but to go for the program that already fits. You don't, you want to, match make basically, and because you can see like a strong pivot of services, or suddenly you're like half a year, a year in, you're like, wait, we're not even meeting those requirements of the reporting. We're not even working in that way. And so suddenly you're like having this whole process change within your own tribe or organization, and it just doesn't work well. It can be done, but it just doesn't work well. So, when you have that strategic plan in place and you know where you're headed already, and then you find the resources that fit is definitely the recommended approach. And there's, as this is a snapshot of programs available, there are more out there. There's energy programs and specific infrastructure development, and broadband expansion, waste management. There's all sorts of opportunities within the USDA. And some of it does require translation, right? It's all in federal language that's being approved by our legislators. And that's where these technical assistance resources, IAC, AVI, the FERTEP, Rural Cap, we're all here to help translate and to assess like the right fit or not, and help you make an informed decision on whether to move forward in those early stages of evaluation.
Yeah, and I think what Lori was saying too earlier about applying for grants as like a group with multiple tribes or organizations, and maybe like having one of these like TA organizations like Rural Cap or IC or any of the ones we've talked about, AVI, be like the main applicant, then that takes a lot of the administrative burden off of tribal administrators and people running smaller organizations or organizations that are already doing a lot of other stuff too. So I feel like just like talking about your vision a lot in these kind of formats seems like eventually you'll like find someone who is like, I share that vision, and then you can do stuff together. It makes it easier.
That could be a good panel discussion for these webinars too, as like a matchmaker or collaboration type.
Yeah.
In some programs, I wanted to mention the Western Sustainable Agriculture and Education Program. They require a lot of collaboration. I think it's usually three to five farmers. So that's another reason to do it. And they have some smaller grants available, and so that's another opportunity too.
I wanted to point out when Tikhon mentioned the timeline that most of these are annual with an application window. Embrace the notion that it doesn't fit your traditional growing season either. If you want to get federal funds for a project this year, it's likely going to be implemented next year. So I would never look to USDA for quick funds available. That's not really the business that we're in, unfortunately. But if you have a long-term vision and even if a program's already closed for this year, don't be afraid to try to get access to the application and work through what it might look like for the next year. Because as mentioned, the larger application shouldn't change too much. I also want to point out USDA.gov/Build Back Better. The Biden administration and the Vilsack administration have put a bunch of additional funding into the food system and what they're calling food system transformation. And almost every single program that touches the food system received additional funding under this administration. Tikhon mentioned the meat and poultry, that there's so many programs. There's new programs, there's old programs that have received additional money. And so if you go to that website, it breaks the food system down by food production, food distribution, processing, and then consumers and markets, and you can just kind of click through. It's for the USDA, I'm mildly impressed by the website and its ease of use, but you can click through and see programs that are open now, programs that are coming open, funded projects. A great way to get an idea of how to fund your project is to, like I said, go look through past reports and funded projects within your state that have already received funding. So again, USDA.gov, it looks like Tikhon threw the link in there, and they're constantly adding new programs and new funding, which is a great thing. I want to say that when I was approached about taking this job at USDA, I was not very enthusiastic for the reason that I was really happy in my nonprofit life, and at Farmland Trust, I was really enjoying the work that I could do. However, given the opportunity to work under the Biden administration and under Secretary Vilsack with all of the money that is now available, it's kind of the doors are wide open, and our leadership really has the mindset of of food system transformation and of getting to yes and funding as, you know, as many projects as we can to transform America's food system. And so it's a great time to be here, and it's a great time to be involved in the agriculture industry and find funding support through USDA. I do want to caveat that also, we are 29 different agencies. So when you talk about finding program funding through a USDA grant or a USDA program, give us a little bit of leniency that we're not all experts in everybody else's programs. Excuse my cats in the background, my daughter's cats actually, not mine. Anyway, there's a lot of funding, there's a lot of programs and a lot of support. And I hope that your takeaway from today is that if you have an idea, you know, kind of throw it up and see if you can find other folks that support that idea, and then come to someone within the USDA family and say, this is what I want to do. How can you help? That's what we're here to do.
I just want to add, Amy, I'm glad that last sentence, because I was going to start off with, I hope I'm not throwing you under the bus or making your life more difficult, Amy, but I did want to reiterate what you were saying, that we've had really good success. And I know a couple of the folks, I don't know everyone in this room, but I know a couple of the folks, and I know that they've also been successful with this approach. You know, right or wrong, from a workload standpoint, relationship building becomes really important. And so Tikhon talked about knowing what your strategic plan is. And that is, you know, whether it's a very formal document or whether it's just something you've spent some time knowing, you know, what your key priorities are so that you can speak to them, really helps when funding opportunities show up and you're able to assess them as a fit. And then, as Amy's saying, definitely, we've had such great success. Reach out to those program officers that are listed in the RFP or who you know are in your regional or state offices, and run those ideas by them. Often I find that they're not able to exactly give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down, like they can't put their finger on the scale, but they can give you advice on the direction or how you might frame something, or whether what you feel is an out-of-the-box idea actually does fit within the framework of the conversations they're having around the language in the RFP. And then worst case scenario, the program you're looking at isn't a good fit, but now you have people in the agency who know what you're interested in and can help do some of that matchmaking with other folks who have reached out to them, and or when new opportunities show up, they know to connect with you because they found something that works with what your ideas were. And so yeah, some of this can take a couple of years and just a lot of phone calls and showing up and volunteering for committees, but the relationship building part can't, I think, be understated.
Well, thank you all so much. This is just like a lot of information. So I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling overwhelmed right now, but we will definitely send out links to all of these programs and try to summarize things in a way so that it feels a little more digestible. Does anyone have any questions right now or anything to add to the conversation?
Hey, my name is Brooke. I'm managing a small farm in Skagway, and I'm sure once I go through a lot of this grant information, I'll see some opportunities. But one of our things that we're needing to look for right now is funding for large equipment for like turning compost and turning soil and stuff like that. If anything just specifically comes to mind to anyone, I guess I'm just throwing that out there.
Under the food, under the urban ag, there is the composting and food waste reduction. So if you're looking for machinery to turn the compost, to build the soil, which it sounded like, I think this is your fit right here. It's exactly what they're trying to do. Also under rural development, there's a waste reduction grant as well. So.
Awesome, thank you.
Margaret, I see you got your hand raised.
Yes, the whole aspect of the waste reduction, and I was at Ketchikan Evergreens yesterday because I contacted them regarding the plugs that they use because they're hydroponic. because there's another operation that just started here in Ketchikan, and so I was able to get some of their waste, which included the plugs, and I was really amazed about what it is. I didn't think it's not what I thought it was going to be, so I'm very excited because I now have first right to all of the used plugs at Ketchikan Evergreen. And I'll probably be able to get all the plugs at the other operation, Alaska Outpost. And I'm going to be using those as a base because here in Ketchikan, we don't have decent soil. So I'm going to be using those as a base on my property so that I can put in a field. That my first field is going to be 5 by 20, but I need to create a base. So I'm going to be using those on the bottom and with some soil on the top because I want to grow Timothy grass for harvesting and drying to sell to people locally. And so that whole aspect of equipment for grinding up vegetable waste from grocery stores is something that I'm looking at. And I know that there's a special type of chipper that rather than a chipper that you would use for small twigs and so forth and cleaning in your yard, for instance, is another type of chipper that works correctly for grocery store produce throwaway stuff. And that's something that I'm wanting to become more involved in. So hopefully I can take the waste somehow from the grocery stores, produce department, and chip it to make it compost down more quickly, and then be able to use that for my own farm use, because I have a small farm that I'm developing on my 1/3 of an acre with my high tunnel and a greenhouse and so forth, so that I can produce compost for myself and then also to be able to sell it as one of the products of my farm. So I'm really excited to be able to find out anything about helping to produce soil that can be utilized. Excuse me for my cough.
T-Con, or I think, actually, I'm not really sure because we kind of messed up.
I was
our-
responding to the chat, sorry.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, he put micro grants by the Division of Ag could be a good fit for that. NRCS might, I don't know. I know they do a lot of stuff with soil, but I'm not sure if they have any programs that are related to composting.
I would definitely take a look at those two specific compost and waste reduction programs that T-Con mentioned. And then another thought that comes to mind when you're talking about equipment, if there's any possibility for the equipment to be shared use amongst a soil and water conservation district or another group of people, there's often funding available if it benefits more than one producer versus a grant or federal funds that allow for purchase of equipment for a single producer. We used to offer that. I was really proud of the Agriculture Innovation and Equipment Grant that we had at the Division of Ag years ago. That was specially crop block grant funding, but that's no longer allowable. But I would say my best advice is if there's a group of people that can shared use the equipment, you're likely to have better luck in finding a federal program that will fund the purchase of equipment. Now we do, again, offer loans and microloans here at Farm Service Agency. If you get to the point where you just realize you must have a piece of equipment, that is a possibility that we could chat about more.
And in my exposure to the federal grants, many of them are more specialized and not funding infrastructure and or equipment, and that's where the loans really step in because they want to see that investment, I think. So yeah, there are specific activities where specific equipment is allowable, but like the value added producer grant, that isn't like a brick and mortar grant. It's not helping you stand up a new processing facility, and it's not helping you buy equipment to process. It's helping with marketing and with promotion of the program and with supplies for packaging and actually getting it to that value added stage. So that's just an example.
I think it's another great opportunity for Farm Bill feedback. when specifically if you're talking to Senator Murkowski and the idea of this Arctic Farm Bill, reminding folks, I mean, they set up the Rural Transportation Cost Program assistance to try to level the playing field for transportation costs. Well, let's point out that the transport of equipment into Alaska is astronomical, right? It's double the cost of the piece of equipment in the lower 48 just to get it to Alaska. So why couldn't we have a special program for equipment being brought into Alaska that, you know, helps level that playing field, helps cover those costs? I think just constantly reminding our congressional delegation that these issues and giving specific examples, you know, if you can show them what it would cost you to, you know, that you can't find the piece of equipment in Alaska, it's not available used, there's no dealers to help service the item that you need. So, you know, there's so many costs involved. If you can show those things to our leadership, that's where they get creative with the funding that exists and allowing for waivers and exemptions on existing programs to address Alaska's needs. Senator Murkowski she's a champion for that.
Yeah, and she's all ears right now on anything Farm Bill. So if you guys want to advocate and educate, you know, send in those letters. I did provide a link to the breakdown of the different titles within the Farm Bill. The titles determine kind of the big groupings of categories and fundings. And so you'll have an understanding of how that is structured as an omnibus bus legislation. I also provided the nativefarmbill.com link, and that's the forward-facing link for the Native Farm Bill Coalition, which is co-founded by Intertribal Agriculture Council, Shakopee Native Tribe, Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, and the Native American Agriculture Fund to create a unified voice and for advocacy and education around the Farm Bill, and where there can be increased parity and equity in the language, the policy language that is determining these programs. You know, this work has resulted in lots of programs being stood up, tribes being included as eligible applicants, you know, a lot of different improvements overall, I think, with the language of the Farm Bill, whereas, you know, in the past, tribes were rarely mentioned throughout the entire legislation. We're now mentioned over 300 times, you know, so I think that's just an important benchmark to note. So if you're looking to get engaged, those are two great ways, but like these are your representatives as well, right? So independently, all of you can write in a letter and say, hey, this isn't working for my operation. How do we fix this? You know, and the more voices, the better, right? And, you know, being involved is great. And so there's also the NRCS has an advisory council. FSA has the state committee, and then is there a more public-facing entity that people are able to get engaged with? No. You know, so there are ways to provide feedback directly to the agencies as well. You know, and you know, under this administration, there's been strong directive from BizLAC and the Biden administration to be inclusive, to say yes, as Amy was saying. So right now is a great time to really engage and say, hey, this isn't working, you know, whether it's at your regional office level or, you know, communicating that in a letter to your representative at the, you know, whether it's Murkowski or Sullivan, you know, all levels are needed, you know, and that input is welcome based on my exposure to agency staff and at all levels. So
we have leadership right now that really wants to find the problems, fix them, and then tell people, look what we did, we fixed this problem. So if there really is a program that, you know, that doesn't fit, or specifically in that arena, we get a lot of criticism that Farm Bill programs are designed for, you know, commercial agriculture and commodity agriculture in the lower 48. It was, that's why it was drafted. So if there's a specific program that just doesn't make sense, if you can create the language that makes it make sense for Alaska, they want to fix that. They really want to fix it and be able to say, look what we did, we fixed this. Now this program is accessed by X number of additional producers or potential producers. So Lori, sorry to jump in over the top of you.
Oh no, I don't want to take away at all from the very real and important focus on the production and distribution, right? Like there needs to be changes. There needs to be that people need to be doing just production and distribution for its own sake. But when I was listening to some of the other questions, it occurred to me one of the because I've also been a little scattered today, but I finally clicked in that, you know, one of the ways that we've met some of these unusual needs that we have, like even buying pieces of equipment or putting infrastructure into our garden, is by building on some of the other capacities that we have on the team, which might include our partners, not just our own organization. And we have a Alaska Native Education Program grant from the Department of Education, as a matter of fact, which is going to put a lot of infrastructure into our garden because we shifted our focus and made production and distribution secondary. So it will still happen, but from the perspective of the grant, the primary focus is on the outreach and capacity building of using that infrastructure and that equipment. So in as much as like finding partners to write some of these grants with, I would also encourage a sort of matchmaking of looking at different lenses, different primary outcomes, because as long as the production and as long as the distribution is happening, you know, it may not, you know, there might be other more creative primary outcomes that can get you the funding that you need. And of course, outreach and capacity building is a way to sustain that production and distribution as well.
Thanks for sharing that. And you're referring to like you guys have a youth program.
That's
Right.
right. Yep, that's right. And youth and community. Yes, so we're actually going to build, and I don't mean to say like education is in parentheses, but again, the primary focus will be on education for the outbuilding that we're going to put into the garden, but it will serve production and distribution and storage purposes as well.
Very clever. Does anyone else have any last questions before we close this out? Or things to add? See, Amy put her email in the chat.
Yeah, and I just want to say, open door, you know, if you have a question, like I said, there's 29 agencies. I'm not an expert in all of them, and I'm certainly not even an expert in my own agency yet, but I will work to find the right door for you and to connect you to the right person and help you brainstorm a little bit on your project. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, thank you all. I'm sure as 3 people who probably get a lot of emails, that's really generous of you to share your email. And thank you everyone who took the time to spend an hour with us today. And I hope you have a really great rest of your afternoon and just thinking about when all the snow is going to be gone and things are going to be growing. Super excited for that.